Captain Jake Morrison stood at the observation deck of Earth Station Alpha, watching the massive alien ship approach through the darkness of space. The vessel looked nothing like the sleek diplomatic cruisers humanity had grown used to seeing. This ship was different. It was built like a weapon, all sharp angles and dark metal that seemed to eat light rather than reflect it. Red warning lights pulsed along its hull like a heartbeat. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Dreadclaw," said Lieutenant Bobby Chen from the communications station behind him. His voice carried a nervous edge that Jake had rarely heard from the young officer. "Put it through," Jake replied, turning away from the viewport. The main screen flickered to life, showing a creature that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. The being was massive, easily 12 feet tall, with scales that shifted from deep green to black in the artificial lighting. Its eyes were yellow and cold, like a crocodile's, and when it spoke, Jake could see rows of teeth designed for tearing flesh. "Human captain," the creature said, its voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the station's hull. "I am War Commander Vex of the Vrex Empire. We come bearing an invitation from the Galactic Council of Apex Species." Jake had read about the Vrex in the intelligence reports. They were hunters, pure and simple. Their entire civilization was built around the concept of predator and prey. They had conquered 17 worlds not through superior technology, but through raw, brutal efficiency. They were everything humans were supposed to fear in the darkness between stars. "We're honored by your visit, War Commander," Jake managed to say, keeping his voice steady. "What brings the Council to Earth?" The alien's mouth curved into what might have been a smile, but it looked more like a threat display. "Your species has caught our attention, humans. You have spread across your local systems with surprising speed. You fight well. You adapt quickly. These are traits we respect." Behind War Commander Vex, Jake could see other shapes moving in the shadows of the alien bridge. Something that looked like a giant insect with too many arms. Another creature that seemed to be made of living darkness, its form shifting and changing as Jake watched. "The Council has decided to extend to humanity a rare honor," Vex continued. "We invite you to attend the Feast of Evaluation. If you prove worthy, your species may join us as equals in the galactic community. If you prove weak..." The alien's voice trailed off, leaving the threat unspoken. "What exactly does this feast involve?" Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer wouldn't be good. "You will dine with us aboard the Dreadclaw. You will share our food, breathe our air, and sit beside beings who could end your existence with a thought. We will evaluate your courage, your strength, and your worthiness to stand among predators." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He had read the reports about other species who had received this invitation. The peaceful Altarians had fled the moment they saw the Dreadclaw. The warrior culture of the Zentari had sent their greatest champions, who had returned broken and traumatized, begging their leaders to submit to Council authority rather than face the predators again. "How many representatives may we send?" Jake asked. "5 of your finest specimens," Vex replied. "Your greatest warriors, your most cunning leaders, your apex examples of human evolution. Choose carefully, Captain. The fate of your entire species may rest on their performance." The transmission ended, leaving Jake staring at a blank screen. Around him, the command center had fallen silent. Everyone had heard the conversation, and everyone understood what it meant. Humanity was being tested by creatures that had never met their equals in the galaxy. "Sir," said Commander Lisa Parker, Earth's chief xenobiologist, stepping up beside him. "I've been monitoring their ship's biosignatures. The readings are disturbing. Whatever's aboard that vessel, it's not just the Vrex. There are at least 3 different species, and all of them register as extreme biological threats." Jake nodded grimly. "What do you know about this Feast of Evaluation?" Lisa pulled up a holographic display showing intelligence data from across the galaxy. "It's a ritual that goes back thousands of years. The Council uses it to determine whether new species deserve to be treated as equals or should be classified as prey. Every species that has failed the test has either been destroyed or forced into servitude. And the ones that passed? There are no records of any species passing, sir. The Council consists entirely of the original founding members. They've never accepted a new equal, Jake looked back at the viewport, where the Dreadclaw hung in space like a promise of violence. Its weapons systems were powered down, but Jake could see the gun ports and missile tubes that lined its hull. This wasn't just a diplomatic vessel, it was a statement of power. "They expect us to send our best warriors," Jake said quietly. "Our strongest, most intimidating representatives. They want us to play their game by their rules." "Sir?" Lisa looked confused. Jake turned away from the window, a strange smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Get me a secure line to Earth. I need to make some very unusual recruitment calls." "What kind of calls, sir?" "The kind that are going to surprise everyone involved," Jake replied, "including us." As his staff scrambled to carry out his orders, Jake remained at the viewport, watching the alien ship. Somewhere aboard that vessel, creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia were preparing to test humanity's worth. They expected fear. They expected submission. They expected humans to follow the same pattern as every other species they had encountered. They were about to learn that humans had a talent for exceeding expectations in the most unexpected ways possible. 3 hours after the alien transmission ended, Jake Morrison sat in his private office making phone calls that would have seemed insane to anyone listening. His first call went to a small restaurant in Brooklyn, New York. "Tony's Kitchen, we're closed, but if this is about the wedding catering next week, I can talk," came a gruff voice with a thick accent. "Is this Tony Ricci?" Jake asked. "Yeah, who wants to know?" "This is Captain Morrison with Earth Defense Command. I have an unusual job offer for you." There was a long pause. "Is this some kind of joke? My nephew put you up to this?" "Mr. Ricci, I need someone who can cook under pressure and isn't easily intimidated. Your military record shows you served 3 tours as a field cook in some very dangerous places. You once prepared a full meal for 200 Marines while under enemy fire. That was a long time ago, Captain. These days I just make pasta and pizza for regular folks. I need you to cook for aliens, Mr. Ricci. Very dangerous aliens. Aliens that have never lost a fight and think humans are weak." Another pause, longer this time. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Dead serious." "And Mr. Ricci, bring your hot sauce collection." The second call went to the Monterey Bay Research Institute in California. Dr. Kate Williams speaking. "Doctor, this is Captain Morrison with Earth Defense. I understand you're the marine biologist who swims with great white sharks for research." "That's correct, though I prefer to say I observe them in their natural environment." "What can I do for you, Captain?" "I need someone who studies predators and isn't afraid of things with big teeth." "How would you feel about meeting some predators from other worlds?" Kate laughed. "Captain, I've been face to face with 20-foot sharks, giant squids, and once got trapped in a cage with a very angry octopus. What exactly are we talking about here?" "Aliens that eat other intelligent species for fun." "Fascinating. When do we leave?" The third call took longer to connect. Jake had to go through the school district office, then wait while they found the right teacher. "This is Amy Johnson. How can I help you?" "Ms. Johnson, I'm Captain Morrison with Earth Defense. I understand you teach kindergarten." "That's right. Is there some kind of emergency at the school?" "No, ma'am, but I have a question. Your principal tells me you once handled a classroom of 35-year-olds during a Halloween party when 2 other teachers called in sick, all by yourself." Amy laughed, a warm sound that made Jake smile despite the serious situation. "Oh, that was quite a day. Little monsters running around hopped up on sugar, half of them crying because their costumes were scary, the other half trying to eat decorations. Why do you ask? How would you feel about dealing with actual monsters, Ms. Johnson? Ones that are much bigger but probably better behaved than kindergartners?" "Captain, after 15 years of teaching small children, I'm not sure anything could surprise me anymore." The fourth call went to a construction site in Texas. "Pete Davis here. What do you need?" "Mr. Davis, this is Captain Morrison with Earth Defense Command. I understand you're a foreman on high-rise construction projects. Been doing it for 20 years. What's this about?" "I need someone who works in dangerous conditions every day and doesn't get rattled easily. Your safety record shows you've never had a serious accident on any of your sites. That's because I respect the danger but don't let it stop me from doing my job. Construction work will kill you if you're not careful, But it'll also kill you if you're too scared to do what needs doing. How do you feel about working with beings that could kill you even if you are careful? Pete was quiet for a moment. Captain, I work 300 feet up in the air every day with heavy machinery and weather that changes without warning. I figure if something wants me dead badly enough, it'll find a way no matter what I do. Might as well be interesting. The last call was the strangest of all. Jake dialed a number for a small diner in rural Montana. Betty's place. We're open till midnight. Is this Betty Miller? Sure is, honey. What can I get for you? Mrs. Miller, this is Captain Morrison with Earth Defense Command. I have an unusual request. Well, I've heard just about everything in 40 years of running this place. Try me. I need someone who can cook for anyone, handle difficult customers, and stay calm under pressure. Your local sheriff tells me you once talked down an armed robber by offering him pie and coffee. Betty chuckled. That poor boy was just hungry and desperate. Sometimes folks just need someone to treat them like human beings instead of threats. What kind of customers are we talking about, Captain? The kind that aren't human, Mrs. Miller. The kind that eat humans. Honey, after raising 5 children and feeding truckers, bikers, and politicians for 4 decades, I've seen plenty of folks who act like they want to eat people. Can't be much different. 2 days later, all 5 of them stood in the shuttle bay of Earth Station Alpha, looking nothing like what anyone would expect from humanity's representatives to a galactic council of predators. Tony wore his best chef's jacket over jeans and carried a duffel bag full of spices. Kate had brought a tablet full of research notes and looked excited rather than nervous. Amy carried a small backpack with what looked like teaching supplies. Pete wore clean work clothes and steel-toed boots. Betty had brought a large purse and wore a floral print dress that made her look like someone's grandmother. Commander Lisa. Parker stared at them in disbelief. Sir, with all due respect, these people aren't warriors, they're not diplomats. They're not even scientists except for Dr. Williams. They're exactly what we need, Jake replied. The aliens expect us to send our most intimidating representatives. They want to see fear, aggression, or submission. They've never encountered humans who genuinely don't care about being intimidated. But, Sir, Lisa, look at them. Jake gestured to the 5 humans who were chatting among themselves like they were heading to a dinner party instead of a potentially deadly encounter with galactic apex predators. Tony once cooked a 7-course meal while his base was under mortar attack. Kate swims with sharks for fun. Amy manages 30 hyperactive children every day. Pete builds skyscrapers. Betty has been feeding strangers and solving their problems for 40 years. They're going to get themselves killed, Lisa whispered. No, Jake said, watching Betty offer homemade cookies to the nervous shuttle crew. They're going to do something that's never been done before. They're going to treat apex predators like ordinary people who happen to look different. As the shuttle prepared for departure, Jake wondered if he had just made the best decision in human history or the worst. Either way, the galaxy was about to learn something new about humanity. The dining hall aboard the Dreadclaw was designed to intimidate. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, making the room feel like a cave where predators might drag their prey. Blood-red lighting cast harsh shadows on black metal walls decorated with the skulls of creatures from dozens of worlds. The table itself was massive, carved from what looked like a single piece of bone. Tony Ricci walked into the room and whistled low. Now that's what I call atmosphere. Very dramatic. Must cost a fortune to heat this place. War Commander Vex watched, from his position at the head of the table, expecting to see fear in the human's eyes. Instead, Tony was examining the skull decorations with professional interest. Interesting cooking methods on some of these, Tony said, pointing to scorch marks on one particularly large skull. You guys use flame grilling? I've got a torch set up back home that could do similar work. Dr. Kate Williams entered next, immediately drawn to a massive aquarium built into one wall. Swimming inside were creatures that looked like crosses between jellyfish and sharks, their transparent bodies pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. Magnificent, she breathed, pulling out her tablet to take notes. The bioluminescence suggests deep ocean evolution, but the muscular structure indicates they're active hunters. Are these from your homeworld? The insectoid Korath commander, whose name translated roughly to Blade Queen, clicked her mandibles in confusion. These humans should be cowering, not asking questions about interior decorating and marine biology. Amy Johnson arrived carrying her small backpack and looked around the intimidating space with the same expression she might use when entering a new classroom. Oh my, this is quite the setup you have here. Very gothic. I bet the children back home would love this for a haunted house theme. Construction worker Pete Davis brought up the rear, his work boots echoing on the metal floor. He looked up at the soaring ceiling and nodded approvingly. Good structural work. Those support beams are solid. Must have been a real job installing that lighting system up there. Finally, Betty Miller entered the room like she was walking into her own diner. She took one look around and shook her head with a maternal expression of mild disapproval. Well, now this is awfully dark, isn't it? And cold too. You boys need some proper lighting in here, maybe some nice warm colors. Makes people feel more comfortable when they're eating. War Commander Vex felt something unfamiliar creeping up his spine. These humans weren't reacting correctly. Where was the fear? The recognition of their obvious inferiority? He gestured to the other predators around the table, each one a legendary killer from their respective species. Humans, he growled, his voice carrying the weight of authority that had made entire civilizations surrender. You sit among beings who have conquered worlds. We are death incarnate, the apex of evolutions. Cruel design, you should be trembling. Betty looked at him with the same patient expression she'd used on thousands of difficult customers over the years. Now, honey, there's no need to raise your voice. We're all adults here. Why don't we sit down and have a nice meal together? The first course arrived, carried by robotic servants that moved with mechanical precision. The dish was a writhing mass of tentacles that continued to move even after being plated. The tentacles were covered in barbs that dripped with venom, and the creature's central mass pulsed with an internal light that suggested it was still very much alive. The Shadowkin representative, a being of shifting darkness called the Void Whisper, leaned forward to watch the humans' reactions. This dish had caused the Altarian ambassador to faint and had made the Zentari warriors vomit in terror. Tony picked up his fork and examined the writhing creature with the critical eye of a professional chef. Interesting presentation. Still, alive, I see. That's one way to guarantee freshness. What's the preparation method here? Looks like it's been marinated in something acidic. He poked one of the tentacles, which immediately wrapped around his fork. Good muscle response. That suggests quality protein. Kate, you ever see anything like this in your research? Dr. Williams leaned over to examine the dish more closely, completely unfazed by the creature's continued movement. The bioluminescent pattern is fascinating. It's clearly a cephalopod variant, probably from a high-pressure environment. The venom delivery system is remarkably sophisticated. Is it safe to eat? Amy asked, the same tone she might use when asking about school lunch ingredients. The venom's probably neutralized by the cooking process, Kate replied. Most biological toxins break down under heat treatment. Pete nodded at his own plate. Well, I've eaten at some pretty questionable food trucks over the years. Figure this can't be worse than that fish taco I had in Tijuana. Betty was already cutting into her portion with practiced efficiency. Reminds me of the time my grandson brought home that pet octopus he caught at the beach. Of course, I had to explain to him why we couldn't keep it in the bathtub. She took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, then reached into her purse and pulled out a small bottle of hot sauce. Not bad, but it could use a little kick. Anyone else want some of this? I make it myself from peppers I grow in my garden. The silence in the dining hall was deafening. War Commander Vex stared as the human grandmother calmly seasoned her meal of living nightmare and offered condiments to her companions. The Korath Blade Queen's compound eyes tracked the human's movements, trying to process what she was witnessing. The taste is quite mild, Tony observed after taking several bites. Almost sweet. What do you usually serve this with? Some kind of starch? Rice, maybe? You are not afraid, the Void Whisper spoke, its voice like wind through a graveyard. Why? Do you not fear? Amy looked up from her plate, a piece of tentacle still on her fork. Well, it's certainly different from what I usually eat, but I've had fifth graders bring stranger things for show and tell. Besides, Fear doesn't make the food taste any better, does it? The second course arrived, a creature that looked like a cross between a lobster and a spider, its shell still smoking from whatever hellish cooking method had been used. Its eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence, and when it moved, which it still did occasionally, razor-sharp claws clicked against the serving plate. "Oh, now that's more like it," Tony said with genuine enthusiasm. "Proper searing technique. Look at that caramelization on the shell. Beautiful work." Betty examined the creature's claws with professional interest. "These look sharp. Good for cracking nuts, I bet. We used to get fresh crab down at the market, but nothing with claws quite this impressive." Dr. Williams was already taking photos with her tablet. "The exoskeleton structure is remarkable. The heat distribution from cooking shows it has excellent thermal properties." Pete picked up one of the smaller claws that had fallen off the main body. "Heavy construction, built to last. You can tell this thing was a fighter." As the humans continued to treat each increasingly horrifying course as merely interesting cuisine variations, something unprecedented began happening in the dining hall of the Dreadclaw. The galaxy's most feared predators started to feel something they had never experienced in their roles as apex beings. They felt ordinary. By the fourth course, something strange was happening around the table. War Commander Vex found himself leaning forward, not to intimidate, but to listen as Tony explained the difference between flame broiling and smoke roasting. The massive reptilian warrior had conquered 17 worlds, but he had never met anyone who could make the preparation of food sound like an art form. "You see, the key is controlling the heat distribution," Tony was saying, gesturing with his fork at the latest dish, which appeared to be some kind of crystalline creature that chimed like wind bells when cut. "Too much direct heat and you lose the natural flavors. Not enough and you don't get the proper texture." Vex nodded slowly. "On my homeworld, we simply tear our prey apart and consume it fresh. There is no preparation." "Well, sure, that works, too," Tony replied without judgment. "Fresh is always good, but cooking can bring out flavors you never knew were there. It's like turning a simple thing into something special." The Korath Blade Queen, whose species communicated primarily through chemical signals and clicking sounds, found herself struggling to form words in the human language. She was fascinated by Dr. Kate Williams, who had been asking detailed questions about Korath biology for the past hour. "Your hive structure is incredible," Kate was saying, making notes on her tablet between bites. "The way individual consciousness can merge into collective decision-making while maintaining personal identity is unlike anything we've discovered on Earth. Have you ever studied human social structures? Our cities and organizations show some similar patterns, though on a much smaller scale." Blade Queen's mandibles clicked rapidly as she processed this. No other species had ever asked about Korath society with genuine scientific curiosity. Most either fled in terror or immediately submitted to hive authority. This human female seemed to understand that their terrifying appearance was just one aspect of a complex civilization. "Humans build hives?" Blade Queen asked carefully. "Oh yes, though we call them cities. Millions of individuals working together, sharing resources, making collective decisions while keeping their individual personalities. Of course, we argue a lot more than I imagine your species does." At the other end of the table, Amy Johnson was engaged in what could only be described as a parenting conversation with the Void Whisper. The being of living shadow had been trying to project fear and despair into the human's mind, only to discover that Amy's mental defenses had been forged in the fires of managing classroom chaos. "You feed on fear?" Amy asked with the same tone she might use when learning about a student's unusual home situation. "That must be very difficult. I imagine it's hard to make real connections with people if they're always afraid of you." The Void Whisper's form rippled with confusion. This was not a conversation it had ever expected to have. "Fear is sustenance. Without fear, we weaken." "Well, that explains the dramatic decorating choices," Amy said kindly. "But you know, fear isn't the only strong emotion. Have you ever tried feeding on excitement or curiosity? Those can be pretty powerful too." The shadow being considered this. In its thousands of years of existence, it had never thought about alternative emotional sources. Fear had always been so easy to obtain. How would one cultivate excitement? It asked hesitantly. Amy brightened. Oh, there are lots of ways. Good stories, games, learning new things. I spend all day helping children discover the world, and the excitement they feel when they understand something new is amazing. Much more positive than fear. Pete Davis was having his own unexpected conversation with a creature called the Bone Crusher, whose species was known for literally crushing the bones of their enemies and using them as building materials. Pete was examining the skull decorations on the walls with professional interest. This is solid construction work, Pete was saying, running his hand along a section of wall made from interlocked bones. Good load distribution, proper joints must take a lot of skill to fit pieces this irregular together. The Bone Crusher rumbled with pride. Few beings had ever appreciated the craftsmanship involved in bone architecture. Each piece must be shaped, fitted. It requires patience. I bet it does. I do similar work with steel and concrete, but this is way more complex. Every piece is different, right? No two bones exactly the same size or shape. Correct. Each structure is unique. Like art. Pete nodded appreciatively. That's the thing about good construction. It's not just about making something that stands up, it's about making something that looks right, feels right, taking pride in the work. But it was Betty Miller who was having the most surprising effect on the gathering. She had somehow managed to make the entire table feel like an extension of her diner back in Montana. When War Commander Vex knocked over his drinking vessel with one of his massive claws, Betty simply reached over with a napkin and cleaned it up without comment. Don't worry about it, honey, she said. Happens all the time. You should see what my place looks like after the Friday night truckers leave. When Blade Queen expressed confusion about human eating utensils, Betty patiently showed her how to hold a fork properly. When the Void Whisper admitted it had never tasted physical food before, Betty cut up small pieces of different dishes and encouraged it to try each one. Food is about more than just nutrition, Betty explained to the assembled predators. It's about bringing people together, sharing something good, making connections. She pulled out her phone and showed them pictures of her diner, her family, her regular customers. See, this is old Bill. Comes in every morning for coffee and eggs. Been doing it for 20 years. And this is the Henderson family. I catered their daughter's wedding last month. The aliens stared at the images of humans gathering around food, sharing meals, celebrating together. It was completely alien to their understanding of how apex predators should behave. You do not compete for resources? Vex asked, confused. Well, sure we compete sometimes, Betty replied, but mostly we share. Life's better when you have people to share it with. As the evening progressed, the predators found themselves asking more questions and sharing more about their own worlds. Vex talked about the honor codes of Vrex warriors. Blade Queen explained Korath art forms. The Void Whisper described the beauty of its Shadow Realm homeworld. Pete shared stories about construction crews working together on dangerous projects. Kate talked about research teams exploring the ocean depths. Tony described the controlled chaos of a busy kitchen. Amy told stories about children from different backgrounds learning to play together. For the first time in their long careers, as galactic apex predators, these beings were having a conversation instead of conducting an intimidation ritual. The humans had done something impossible. They had made the most feared creatures in the galaxy feel normal. War Commander Vex looked around the table and felt something he had never experienced before. For just a moment, he wasn't a terrifying apex predator or a conqueror of worlds. He was just someone having dinner with interesting people who treated him like he belonged there. The realization should have been disturbing. Instead, it felt surprisingly comfortable. The final course arrived with great ceremony. The robotic servants wheeled in a massive covered dish that seemed to pulse with its own dark energy. When they lifted the cover, a wave of pure terror washed over the room. The dish contained nothing visible, just an writhing mass of absolute darkness that seemed to eat light and hope itself. The Void Whisper leaned forward with anticipation. This was their ultimate test, the one that had broken every other species. Pure, concentrated fear, made manifest. The psychic pressure alone had driven previous ambassadors to madness. Behold, War Commander Vex announced, his voice carrying the weight of ancient ritual. The fear of the void, the final course that reveals the true nature of all living beings. None have ever consumed it without surrendering their sanity to terror. The humans looked at the writhing darkness with the same mild interest they had shown every other course. Tony tilted his head thoughtfully. "Is it supposed to move like that?" he asked. "Reminds me of this chocolate mousse I tried to make once. Complete disaster. Ended up looking like something from a horror movie." Kate was already taking readings with her tablet. "Fascinating. The energy patterns suggest it's not actually matter in any conventional sense. More like concentrated psychic energy given semi-physical form." Amy nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Oh, like feelings made solid. I've seen kids do something similar with Play-Doh when they're really angry or scared. They make these dark, scary shapes." Pete examined the dish from a structural perspective. "Heavy psychic pressure. I can feel it trying to get into my head. Reminds me of working on high-rises during bad weather. The wind tries to push you around, make you panic. Trick is not to fight it, just acknowledge it and keep doing your job." Betty reached over and patted the edge of the serving dish like she might comfort a scared animal. Now, what's all this fuss about? You're just trying to scare people, aren't you?" "Well, that's not very nice." The Void Whisper stared in disbelief. The fear of the void was its greatest creation. Thousands of years of collected terror and despair concentrated into pure nightmare. These humans were treating it like a mildly interesting appetizer. "You must consume it," the Void Whisper whispered, urgently. "It is the final test. You must face your deepest fears." "Okay," Amy said agreeably. She picked up her spoon and took a small bite of the writhing darkness. The effect was immediate. The psychic energy hit her mind like a sledgehammer, flooding her consciousness with every fear she had ever experienced. Darkness, loneliness, failure, the terror of being inadequate, of letting down the children who depended on her. Amy experienced it all for about 3 seconds, then she started laughing. "Oh my goodness," she giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. "This is just like the first day of school all over again. All those scary possibilities, all that worry about everything that could go wrong." The other humans looked at her with concern, but Amy waved them off, still chuckling. No, it's fine. It's just, after 15 years of teaching kindergarten, you learn something important about fear. It's usually much worse in your imagination than it is in reality." She took another spoonful, and this time she was ready for it. The fears came again, but Amy met them with the same patient strength she brought to comforting a crying 5-year-old. "The thing about working with children," she explained to the stunned predators, "is that you see fear all the time. Fear of the dark, fear of being alone, fear of monsters under the bed. And you learn that fear isn't something to be defeated or conquered. It's something to be understood and comforted." Tony tried his portion next. The darkness showed him visions of failure, of every dish he had ever burned, every customer he had disappointed, every moment of doubt in his abilities. But Tony had worked in professional kitchens for 20 years. He knew about pressure and failure and getting back up when everything went wrong. "Huh," he said thoughtfully. "Bitter at first, but there's something else underneath. Almost like relief? Like when you finally admit you messed up and can start fixing it." One by one, the other humans tried the fear of the void. Kate faced her terror of the unknown depths, of the ocean, and found it familiar, like visiting an old friend. Pete confronted his fear of heights and falling, then shrugged and said it felt like any other day at work. Betty encountered her deepest fear of being unable to help people who needed her, and responded by offering the psychic manifestation a cup of tea and asking if it wanted to talk about its problems. The silence in the dining hall stretched on, for long minutes. The galaxy's most feared predators sat in stunned silence, watching 5 ordinary humans treat their ultimate weapon like a slightly unusual dessert. Finally, War Commander Vex spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. How what, honey?" Betty asked kindly. "How do you face fear without being consumed by it?" Betty smiled the same warm smile she had given to thousands of customers over the years. Well, I suppose it's because fear isn't really the enemy. Fear just tells you something might be dangerous or difficult. But being afraid doesn't mean you can't handle it. It just means you need to be careful and maybe ask for help. She looked around the table at the assembled predators. You know, I think you all might be a little afraid yourselves. Afraid that maybe being scary is the only way people will respect you. But respect earned through fear isn't really respect at all. It's just people doing what they think they have to do to survive. Amy nodded in agreement. Real respect comes from treating people well and being treated well in return, from sharing things and helping each other. From working together toward something good, Pete added. From learning about each other, Kate contributed. From sharing a good meal and good conversation, Tony finished. War Commander Vex looked around the table at his fellow council members. For the first time in his long life, he wondered what it would be like to be respected rather than feared, to have allies rather than subjects, to share meals and stories instead of just conquest and intimidation. We have never, he said slowly, encountered beings like you. Betty reached across the table and patted his massive clawed hand with the same gentle touch she had used on the fear of the void. That's all right, honey. We've never met anyone like you either. But that just makes it more interesting, doesn't it? 3 hours later, the human delegation prepared to return to their shuttle. The dining hall that had been designed to showcase predatory dominance now felt more like Betty's diner after a busy evening. The skull decorations seemed less threatening, somehow, more like interesting art pieces than warnings. War Commander Vex stood at the airlock, something like respect in his ancient eyes. The Galactic Council will convene to discuss your species' application for membership, but I believe I can safely say that humanity will be welcomed as equals. That's very kind, Betty replied. And you're all welcome to visit Earth anytime. I'll cook up something special for you. As the shuttle pulled away from the Dreadclaw, Tony was already planning the menu for the return visit. Kate was organizing her notes about alien biology. Amy was thinking about how to explain the evening to her students. Pete was sketching ideas for construction projects that might interest the Bone Crusher. Betty was wondering if the Void Whisper might like her apple pie. Behind them, aboard the most feared vessel in the galaxy, the apex predators of the universe sat in their dining hall and experienced something completely new. For the first time, in thousands of years, they didn't feel like predators at all. They felt like people who had just made some very interesting friends.